Have you ever found yourself at a dead end, where the only way out was to risk everything, even your own life, for a greater love? This is the story of Samuel, a father who made an unbreakable promise, and to keep it, he had to cross the most dangerous line of his existence, prepare for a journey of courage, pain, and a love that defies any border. This content is a work of fiction inspired by real testimonies. We do not promote unsafe migration. Thousands have lost their lives in risky journeys. We advocate for legal, safe, and humane routes. This story aims to generate empathy and reflection. Before we dive deep into this narrative, we want to know where you're watching us from. What city or country are you watching this video from? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if this story touches your heart, please hit the like button. It's a simple way to tell us we're on the right track and helps this content reach more people. If you believe in the power of these stories and want to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. This helps us continue to give a voice to important stories like Samuel's. The air in rural Guatemala still carried the dense scent of earth, damp from recent rain, of the clinging mud that shapes not just the landscape, but the very essence of a life lived close to the ground. Samuel was born there, amidst the rhythmic thud of his father's tools, striking wood, a constant echo of hard work, and the profound, resilient silence of his mother, a stillness that spoke volumes about inner strength. He grew up with steady hands, agile fingers, learning the ancestral craft passed down through generations, the gift of transforming rough logs into pieces of art and utility, a legacy of sweat, dedication, and artisanal skill. But life, capricious in its tragedies, struck him with the loss of his wife during the birth of their tiny son, Matthias. In that moment of searing pain, where the joy of arrival mingled with the overwhelming desolation of departure, with the sweet, ephemeral scent of a new being mixed with the bitter taste of grief, Samuel made a vow, a silent, unbreakable pact with his own heart. His eyes blurred with tears fixated on the newborn, and he promised, Matthias would not inherit just the carpentry trade. He would inherit a clean name, a dignified future, a life that Samuel would fight with every fiber of his being to make infinitely different and better than his own. For years, Samuel kept that promise with an almost obsessive dedication. In the humble backyard of their home, his small workshop was a haven of scents, textures, and sounds. The sweet, resinous aroma of freshly cut cedar mingled with the pungent smell of varnish. Fine sawdust floated in the air like golden particles in a sunbeam, a silent ballet of matter and light. There, between the rustling of planes and the thud of hammers, Samuel brought solid doors to life that protected homes, robust chairs that invited rest, mended broken objects with a craftsman's patience, and, with the same mastery, created delicate frames for mirrors that reflected the lives and dreams of others. Matthias, still small, grew up in this environment, his tiny fingers exploring the texture of the wood and the cool metal of the tools, his curious, bright eyes observing his father's precise movements. Sawdust was his impromptu playground, the unmistakable scent of wood and varnish, his daily lullaby. Samuel's love manifested in every piece, in every hard day's work, fueled by the hope for a kinder future. But time, relentless and unforgiving, began to erode the foundations of that simple, honorable life. The world around Samuel shifted unmercifully. The country's economy, already fragile like a dry branch, sank like a leaky boat in turbulent waters. Inflation galloped. Prices in the market soared unchecked, making life increasingly expensive, an unsustainable burden on shoulders that could barely breathe. Food, once plentiful, grew scarce, and dignity seemed to drain away with the last coins. And as a cruel and final symptom of this decay, orders began to dry up. Requests for doors and chairs vanished, and the workshop, once vibrant and full of life, plunged into an agonizing silence, a silence that echoed Samuel's growing anxiety. Tragedy, however, arrived in an even more brutal form with the implacable force of nature, water. A furious, merciless flood, sparing nothing in its path, swept through the small village. The river burst its banks, streets turned into raging torrents, and muddy, filthy water invaded homes, dragging everything in its wake. In Samuel's workshop, the flood was devastating. Essential tools were swept away by the current. Piles of noble wood, representing months of work and investment, were lost in the mud, and with them, precious memories of a past that seemed to have slipped through his fingers like fine sand. Samuel looked at his hands, once so capable, calloused, marked by the honesty of years of hard labor, and a cruel truth imposed itself, chilling him to the bone. They alone, no matter how skilled or honest, were no longer enough. The craft that was his life, his livelihood, his identity, seemed to have lost its power against a greater, uncontrollable force. Matthias, at just 8 years old, had the innocence and purity of childhood in his eyes, but also a silent need that his father could no longer ignore. His unspoken requests were a constant weight. A new school notebook that wasn't patched up and worn, a pair of sneakers that didn't chafe his growing feet, a more complete dinner that would quell the hunger that never seemed to go away. His son's unspoken questions weighed more heavily than the heaviest log of wood. Samuel's mind was in turmoil, a chaos of worries and fears, but his love for Matthias was the only certainty that remained firm. On that night that would change everything, the decision hung heavy in the air of their small house, thick with humidity and uncertainty. Samuel sat at the table with Matthias, the son who was the reason for his existence, and prepared a simple porridge, the little that remained to feed both bodies and souls. The warm, comforting smell of the porridge filled the room, a bittersweet contrast to the bitterness that tightened Samuel's chest. He looked into Matthias's clear eyes, trying to convey all his determination, his immense love, his contained pain in those few words. His voice, choked but firm, echoing in the night's silence, he said, "I'm not leaving to lose you, son. I'm leaving to come back with a future we can build together." He wouldn't leave to abandon him, but to ensure that their future somehow could still be built, brick by brick, board by board, promise by promise. It was the only hope left. Samuel didn't seek out coyotes or traffickers, those shadowy figures who promised the impossible in exchange for everything a person possessed, often delivering only emptiness and death. His inheritance was his untouched pride, his clean hands, and an unshakable faith in his own endurance, in the strength of his body and spirit. He armed himself with the bare minimum for the crossing, a worn, threadbare backpack containing a few pieces of dry bread already hardened from lack of moisture, and 2 bottles of water. A painfully insufficient amount for what was to come, he knew. But the most precious item was a worn, folded photograph kept close to his chest of his wife holding baby Matthias. The image, so precious and fragile, was his compass, his inexhaustible fuel, the reason for every grueling step. The trails he intended to follow were whispered legends in market conversations, dangerous shortcuts known only to those who, like him, were already at the brink of despair, with nothing left to lose but hope itself. He knew the journey would be tortuous, that pain would be his constant companion and relentless shadow, but he trusted the fiber of his soul, the stubbornness of his will to live for Matthias. The first night was a blur of silent steps, the rhythmic creak of his backpack against his back and the muffled sound of his own heart beating erratically in his chest, a drum of anxiety. The darkness was a dense, oppressive cloak, and every shadow cast by trees or rocks seemed to hide an imminent danger. The air of the early morning, damp and heavy, permeated his bones, bringing a cold that wasn't just climatic, but seemed to freeze his soul, paralyzing his thoughts. The second night brought with it the crushing weight of uncertainty, the brutal realization that the path would be longer, crueler, and more desolate than any story or legend could describe. In some stretches, he encountered other travelers, silent specters with empty eyes, etched with hardship, each with a reason more painful than the last for being there. Tearing apart their dignity in search of a better dawn, the air seemed denser with shared pain. Thirst and hunger were the common currency between them, a universal language of deprivation. But Samuel didn't engage in idle chatter or shared laments. He guarded his own story like one guards noble wood, which needs to be treated with care, with respect, so it doesn't spoil, so it retains its essence. Every step, every sharp ache in his joints, every short, breathless gasp under the weight of his backpack and the promise was an act of silent love for Matthias. The smell of the dry, dusty earth that rose with each footfall, the grit that clung to his throat and made it rough like sandpaper, the coarse, dry texture of the leaves that crumbled beneath his feet, everything blended into a symphony of sensory deprivation, a constant torment that tested his limits. His shallow, ragged breathing, his heart pounding hard, all indicated physical exhaustion, but his son's image propelled him forward. One night, the treacherous darkness and extreme fatigue brutally overcame him. He lost his way, his sense of direction completely vanished, replaced by a mental confusion that made him walk in circles for hours, feeling despair swell within him. Physical exhaustion and sleep deprivation weighed like lead on his mind, blurring his reason. His body, without warning, gave way under the unbearable weight. He collapsed and ended up sleeping under a thorny bush, the dry leaves scratching his skin, his backpack clutched tightly against his chest as if it could protect him from all the evils and fears that surrounded him. Sleep came, heavy, and with it, an escape from reality. He dreamed of Matthias, not a helpless boy, but a strong young man, with the same skillful hands, building a chair beside him, the soft, familiar sound of a plane shaving wood. For a brief moment, the pain, the cold, and the fear vanished, replaced by an illusory peace. At dawn, with every fiber of his muscles protesting and his mouth as dry as a desert, the sight of a fallen fence amidst the arid, monotonous landscape ignited a faint spark of hope in his chest. He knew. He was closer than he was far. The faint smell of civilization, however distant, was already perceptible in the air. But he also knew he was weaker than ever. The little water he carried ran out. The dry bread was already a distant memory. His throat scraped with every attempt to swallow non-existent saliva. His tongue swelled, and his body begged for rest, begged for an end. But thirst was a constant torture, an internal burning that consumed him, and hunger, a sharp pain in his stomach, an emptiness that expanded. The longing for his son, an invisible weight he carried in his chest, hurt more than the blisters that formed one by one on his feet, turning each step into agony. Still, with a foggy mind, a body on the verge of collapse, and vision blurred by dehydration, he pressed on. There was no choice. There was only Matthias and the promise to be kept. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to leave something important behind for someone you love? Share your experience. If Samuel's journey touched you, please like this video. Your interaction is essential for more people to discover stories like this and for our channel to continue being a space for empathy and reflection. Consider subscribing to the channel to support our work and not miss future stories that aim to transform pain into awareness. Arriving at the border town was a blur of exhaustion and disorientation, an overwhelming avalanche of sensations. The hot asphalt burned the soles of his feet. The pungent smell of car exhaust and sewage mingled with the odor of cheap food, and the chaotic din of voices, sirens, and honking horns was an assault on his already weary ears. Samuel stumbled through the streets, his body heavy, every muscle protesting, his mind foggy, trying to process the new environment. He slept on the street for a few nights. The cold, hard ground his only bed, his back aching, the starry sky his ceiling, sometimes grayed by pollution. Dissociation settled in like a protective shield. He saw himself from the outside, a distant observer of his own ruin, a stranger in his own body. His body was there, present, but his mind seemed to float, protecting him from the rawness and brutality of the reality that imposed itself. He found precarious shelter in a warehouse with other informal workers, men and women with empty eyes, marked by deprivation and untold stories, all seeking a minimal chance of survival, an odd job, a plate of food, a place to spend the night. The shared silence of pain was more eloquent than any words. He landed his first gig as a construction helper, heavy, repetitive work that paid barely enough to survive. His aching body reacted with spasms and tremors to the brutal physical effort, his muscles burning with each lifted brick or bag of cement, his breathing short and ragged, gasping as if air were a luxury. The dust, which used to be sawdust, was now cement and dirt, irritating his nostrils and throat. On his first night in the warehouse, he slept on the cold concrete floor. The worn photograph of Matthias and his wife clutched against his chest like a talisman, an anchor in the internal storm of his thoughts. Guilt gnawed at him in silence, a slow but constant acid. Guilt for having left his son, guilt for not knowing if he could fulfill his promise of a better future. These emotional and psychological reflections were a heavier burden than any brick he carried. He felt the shock, the mental confusion, the emotional pain that permeated everything. Weeks dragged on in an almost absolute silence, a muteness that became his defense mechanism. Samuel barely spoke, avoiding any deep interaction. He didn't seek friendships, didn't allow himself bonds that might weaken his determination or expose his vulnerability. Every hard-earned, painful cent was carefully saved, wrapped in a piece of cloth, and noted in a small notebook with a carpenter's precise, firm handwriting. Every sum, no matter how small, directed towards the sole, unshakable goal: to return home, to Matthias. The culture shock of the new city, so different from his village, and the deep, almost palpable loneliness were his constant companions, and mental confusion at times blurred his thoughts, mixing dreams and reality. He experienced dissociation, a coping mechanism of the mind to deal with the intensity of pain and post-traumatic stress. It was as if he were watching himself, detached, not fully feeling the raw reality around him. The silent trauma of the crossing and the loneliness accompanied him. Sometimes, when the longing for Matthias became unbearable and hope seemed to want to abandon him, Samuel managed to make a call. His son's voice, a distant echo of childhood, was his only melody, the only thing that pulled him out of that stupor. Hearing that innocent, lively timbre, Samuel felt tears well up in his eyes, a river he refused to let flow, maintaining a facade of strength. He held back the emotion with all his might, swallowed the lump in his throat, and, with a voice he forced to sound cheerful and confident, said, "Everything's fine, champ. Just wait a little longer for me." Small white lies to protect the innocence he had left behind, to keep the flame of hope alive in his son's heart. The frustration of not being able to be present, to embrace his son, to see his face up close, was a silent, deep pain, a trauma rooted in his soul, an emptiness that followed him. One day, amidst the exhausting, colorless routine, Samuel was called for an actual carpentry job, a small renovation in a family home, something that brought him back to his trade, his true identity. The smell of new wood and glue, the familiar touch of tools in his calloused hands, Everything was a balm for his wounded soul, a reminder of who he truly was. As he worked, immersed in the art he mastered, a woman, the homeowner, observed him with attention and gentle curiosity. Her soft voice broke Samuel's silence. "What did you do before you came here?" He paused for a moment, his hammer suspended, his heart beating faster. A genuine smile, long forgotten and almost unfamiliar on his face, marked by the sun and deprivation, lit him up. "I was a carpenter," he replied, with a pride that wasn't just in the words, but came from his soul. "And I still am." In that moment, he wasn't just a migrant, an unnamed construction helper. He was Samuel, the carpenter. That smile, the first in a long time, was a subtle but powerful sign that, despite everything, hope still burned, stubborn and silent within him, like an ember hidden beneath the ashes. 2 years. Time which once seemed to drag at the border, crushing every second with the weight of loneliness and effort, now flowed differently, with a gentler rhythm. 2 years had passed since Samuel's decision, since the unbreakable promise made to Matthias under the faint flickering light of a lamp. But distance, however long and cruel, could never erase the primary reason for his crossing. He never forgot, not for a second, why he was there. That childlike face that was his beacon, his guiding star amidst the darkness. Matthias's image, vivid in his mind, was the driving force behind each new day. Today, Samuel's routine has taken on a new shape, a less brutal, more humane rhythm. He works as a permanent helper for a small business owner, a man who somehow saw more in him than just a pair of calloused hands and tired eyes. A man who welcomed him, offering not just an honest wage, but a sense of belonging, of renewed purpose. Samuel manages to send money home every month, a constant flow of hope and affection that crosses borders and faithfully reaches the hands of his family in Guatemala. With the sweat of his labor, he bought new tools for the workshop destroyed by the flood, tools he would one day use himself when the promise of return came true. And, with the help of his brother, who became a strong support back in Guatemala, the house roof has already been rebuilt, a secure and sturdy shelter over Matthias's head, protecting him from rain and sun. The outcome of Samuel's story is not grand, nor Hollywood-esque, free from any forced idealization. It's a quiet, everyday, possible new beginning, built with resilience and small gestures of a love that transcends distance. Matthias is growing up, no longer an 8-year-old boy, but a young man in the making, with his own dreams and discoveries. He loves to draw furniture, simple sketches of chairs and tables that reveal an inherited passion, a talent that flows in his veins. In his letters to his father, he sends these drawings, visual messages of a future still waiting to be built by joint hands. The words are few, but the drawings, a universe of possibilities. Samuel hasn't physically returned yet. The barrier of distance remains a daily challenge, but the connection, that much is unwavering, stronger than any border. Every Sunday, cell phone in hand, a video call is made. And there, through the screen, he builds with words of affection, with shared laughter, with the unique tone of voice that only a father has. A home from a distance, a bridge of affection. He is not physically present for daily hugs or backyard games, but his presence is felt in every call, in every piece of advice, in every shared drawing, in every hard-earned cent sent with sacrifice. He crossed a border, not just geographical, but of existence itself, of his soul, to avoid losing the dignity that life in his country denied him, to prevent his son from succumbing to the same poverty that surrounded him. And, on the harsh journey, in deprivation, in loneliness, he understood a simple yet profound truth that became his new creed. A father is not just someone who never leaves, someone who is always by your side. But above all, it is someone who, even from afar, never stops building. building a future, building a legacy, building an unbreakable bond with those left behind, a foundation of hope for his son. There is no glamorization, no excessive drama, just the raw and powerful reality of a man who, driven by love, kept going step by step, day after day, with the hope of a future reunion. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a like and a comment. Your participation is very important to us. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your chance to join our community. Subscribe for more stories that transform suffering into awareness. Don't forget to hit the notification bell and share this story with anyone who needs to believe in the power of purpose again.